SWANSON. That's that DUTROW. Thank you very much. Canal Street Blues. New Orleans back in 1885. Besides Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver, Kid Ory was also born in that year. So that was a good year for jazz, we have to admit. And many people, in spite of the fame of the other gentlemen, many people feel that King Oliver that we're honoring today was probably the most influential, you know, when all the smoke had cleared of all of these three people. And he started playing very early, about 15 years old. He picked up the trombone, didn't do too well with that, so he switched to the cornet. When he was about 16 years old, he decided to go on the road for a little while, went to Florida and got in a fight and got his eye cut up and kind of semi-blind in one eye because of that. Kind of a scamper, I guess. He came back to New Orleans in 1904, was a butler for a while, and was continued playing in the evening, just like all of us do, a little part-time job. And he, in 1907, if you can recall, Buddy Bolden was the king of jazz at that time, and Buddy Bolden went insane, I guess, and they had to haul him out of there. But he was at that time in a group called the Eagle Jazz Band. Well, a gentleman named Freddie Capard took over, and he was named the next King Capard of jazz down there. Well, he left the Eagle in 1908, and then that's when King Oliver came in, and he played in the Eagle in 1908. So he had his good stuff there. Good musicians. They were all the top-notch people in New Orleans at the time. This stuff was pretty innocent things. This was not in Storyville at that point. This was still in the nice part of town. But he was tempted because a lot of musicians were moving over to Storyville, and so he was tempted as well. In 1909, he joined the Onward marching band, which happened to be located in the Storyville area, and they had a good time over there for a few years. And this is one of the first tunes that King Oliver wrote back in those days while he was you know, getting his experience, I guess you might say. A little thing called the Jazzin' Babies Blues. Thank you. Jazz and Babies Blues. All right. We do have some more pictures for you today, other than just old Joe up there. Actually, he was born Joe. His mother didn't name him King Oliver. It's named him Joe. Yeah, so we have the next picture here. We would like to show you the kind of area that King Oliver called home there for a while when in his teenage years. And this is a very interesting area and a very interesting picture. Back in the very late part of the last century, actually in 1897, New Orleans got to be such a rowdy town, it was just uncontrollable and nobody could do anything about it. So they decided to put together a little block of land, and you see it there, a little parcel that would be none other used then for fun and games. And this is the first and only legalized red light district in the United States that we've ever had and probably ever will, at least up to this point. And that's it right there. You can see what a lovely place it was. This is, it's about a 6 blocks long and a 2 or 3 blocks wide spot in New Orleans. It's right north of where the French Quarter is today. So if you go to the French Quarter, if you go to New Orleans, this is just north of that and right next door to it. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. It would be a great place to go, but it's all gone now. But anyway, this is where these folks played. There was in existence for about 20 years, and in the early days they had several houses that were quite nice, that they had piano players only, and we'll talk about those a little bit tomorrow with Jelly Roll Morton. And then in the middle section there was a lot of halls and dance halls and things, and the musicians and everybody else that wanted to would come, and they'd have these dances all over the place. And this is kind of the place where the bands actually played. The bands didn't play at the real fancy sporting places, but they did play at these halls, and they had a good time apparently. Well, King Oliver cut his teeth really in this kind of area. And as you can remember, we had a fellow that he replaced an Eagle Band member, Freddie Keppard. Well, he was still, of course, around at that time and calling himself the King Keppard, you know, the king of jazz. And King Oliver, he was still just Joe Oliver at that time, felt kind of badly about that because he felt he was playing much better than Keppard was. Can we have that next slide there, Ann? Maybe that might be good. By the way, this is my lovely bride of 30 years, 35 years, how time goes. This is Ann. Yes. Let me see here. I'm going to, oh, that's not, let me see, just a minute, what is that? Oh, yeah, that's a close-up of what the entrance to Storyville looked like. On the front there you see Tom Anderson's Cafe. Tom Anderson was the unofficial mayor of Storyville, and he kind of ran the show. He was a tough guy. And his building was interesting there in the corner. You see, that was the very first one in the United States to be all completely electric lighted. So he had at least that going for him. But some of the sporting houses you can see in the distance there, in the background there, that's where the things went on, unusual and strange. They're all gone today. Yeah, could we see the next one now, Ann? The next one is kind of interesting. I'll show you where King Oliver was. And he was playing at a place called, yes, he was playing at a place called Abadee's. And let me see, Ann, if you can find Abadee's on there, it's, show me the map there a minute. It's up there somewhere. 34 maybe. Anyway, it's about 3 blocks up, and you can see a spot there. He was playing at Abadee's, and about a block away was the place that all the musicians like to play called Pete Lala's. And Pete Lala's had Freddie Keppard, and he was playing there, and King Oliver was playing at this place called Abadee's. He was playing an interesting place, a little quartet it was, with Richard M. Jones playing piano and big guy Louis Nelson playing clarinet, and they were having a good time. But as I said, King Oliver was kind of upset about Keppard being having all this honor when he thought he deserved it. So one night he came out of Abadee's, got real mad. He said, "Okay, Jones," he said, "beat it out in B flat." And I guess that's what he did. And King Oliver, anyway, walked out from the place right out into the street, and he started playing whatever he was playing, but he was playing, I'm sure, loud and as wild as he could do it. And pretty soon everybody came out of Pete Lala's to see what was going on, and King Oliver kept there blowing for everything he could think of. And pretty soon the folks all, you know, got into this. They all came down to Abadee's and went back in with him, and King Oliver came in and says, okay, that'll show them, you know, and stuff. But he brought all the folks back in, and after that, he was known as the king of the cornet down in New Orleans. So that's just the way that did it. A good time down those days. Here's another tune that King Oliver was famous for. It's one what the band wives like. We hope you like it too, called Southern Stomps. Thank you, Southern Stomps. And maybe we could have the next picture up right now. I think you'd probably are dying to see what this place, Pete Lala's, look like. It's, you know, very classy, very similar to where we are today. And so we'd like to show you what that looked like back in New Orleans. This particular picture was taken a few years later, so it doesn't quite have the same charm it did probably in 1908. But there it is, there's Pete Lala's. Doesn't that look great? You can see why people flock to that place. Well, after King Oliver kind of made a fool out of Capard, and you'll find that that's kept going on through his life. I feel kind of sorry for Freddie because he kept being dogged by King Oliver from then on. Anyway, Capard and some of his pals left New Orleans in 1908 and moved to Chicago. They thought they could, you know, do a little bit better up there. And so King Oliver moved over to this wonderful place, Pete Lawless, and played there with Kid Ory. And he was in Kid Ory's band. The place was actually run by Clarence Williams, another famous name down in New Orleans in those days. Clarence wrote the Royal Garden Blues and some of the tunes that we play. But they all kind of intertwined, as you can see, through the New Orleans days down there. But this is the thing. In 1917, the worst thing that could possibly happen happened. The Navy got upset because of the goings-on down in Storyville. And, of course, this is a big naval area down there, and the Department of Navy shut down Storyville, said no more. So that was the end of that. Isn't that a sad kind of thing? Yeah, I know. We'd like to know ourselves where they all went. Anyway, King Oliver did leave Storyville at that point. That was in 1918. He said, you know, this is not really making it anymore, so he went up to Chicago. And a fellow that we'll also talk about a little bit more as time goes on took his place in Lala's, and that's a person you probably know a little bit more famous. His name was Louis Armstrong. So they all had their chance. We'd like to do another tune for you now, real famous by King Oliver, called The Snake Rag. Oh, thank you, Snake Rag. Woo! Oh, boy. All right, I just mentioned that King Oliver decided to leave New Orleans in 1918 and make his way to Chicago, where the action was. That's where Freddie Capard was. He was a fellow named Bill Johnson, the bass player, and Freddie had left earlier, as you recall, and started a band up there. Well, in 1918, Bill Johnson, and you'll hear his name more. In fact, it's just interesting. We'll bring in Bill Johnson again tomorrow at the other session with Jelly Roll Morton. But Bill Johnson happened to get a job at a place called the Royal Garden Cafe. You've heard the Royal Garden Blues. You know, this is the place that this was named for. And he had the job, but he didn't have a band, so he was madly putting together the band. He didn't have a good trumpet player, so he thought that the best bet he could do would be to use King Oliver. So he sent for King Oliver. This was in 1918, and King, of course, the things are not doing real well in New Orleans, so he said, that sounds great to me, so let's go out and go up and do that. Well, at the same time, there was another place called the Dreamland Inn in Chicago, and they also needed a cornet player. And this was one of the people in the band. There was a person you might remember, Sidney Bechet. Well, he found out about this, that King Oliver was coming up to Chicago, and so he got the information and everything else. So when the train pulled in that morning, here was Sidney Bechet waiting for him, as well as Bill Johnson. And so King Oliver got off the train, and here these two guys come rushing at him, and of course, Sidney Bechet acted all surprised, and everybody, like, oh, gee, we didn't know there was any conflict here. And so they said, well, why don't we go just real friendly like, and we'll go to a bar, and we'll see if we can sort out, where King Oliver is going to play, because both these places need to have a cornet player. So they sat down, and like gentlemen, they came to a conclusion. They said, and this is the way it ended up, that King Oliver would play at the Royal Garden Cafe from 9 till 1 o'clock every day, every evening, and then from 2 o'clock until 5 o'clock next morning, he'd go to Dreamland and play. So that's what he did. So, yes. They talked about when King Oliver came to Chicago that this is the greatest single event to ever happen in jazz history in Chicago, was when King Oliver came, and so I guess it probably was. We'd like to do a tune that they did there in those days. I think I'm going away to wear you off my mind. All right, thank you. I'm going away to wear you off my mind. Oh, it's time for maybe a new poster, Ann. He played in these two places for a little while, for about over a year, and of course this gets old after a while. That's a lot of playing. And so he finally started his own band and broke away from the rest of these folks, and got his own band at the Dreamland area that we just mentioned before. He very quickly ran out of that. That didn't seem to work out too well, so they decided to go on the road. So 1920, 1921, they hit the road, and they came out to California. So they were out in the west part. This particular picture is very interesting. This was taken in around 1921 in Oakland, California, very near where we come from. Isn't that kind of a fun picture? You see the lady that's in the middle there. King Oliver is the one with the trumpet, of course. Right next to him is a lady. That's Lil Hardin. By that time, he had found her, and she's the piano player that, of course, ended up with the band and married Louis Armstrong eventually. So that's what they looked like back in 1921. It's about the way we look right now. Maybe we've got a future yet. Anyway, that was good times. In 1922, he was offered a job back in Chicago at a place called the Lincoln Gardens. Now, this is the Royal Gardens that just had a paint job, so it's the same old place we're talking about here. So he took his band back there, and he added some new musicians at this point. He brought in the Dodds brothers. You've probably heard of Johnny and Baby Dodds. Johnny, the great clarinet player, and Baby Dodds, the drummer, and some other musicians from New Orleans that were top-notch. And he had a wonderful band, and they played in 1922. The Lincoln Gardens, Royal Gardens, was a huge place. I don't know how it compared to here, but it would hold about 700 people. So how many do you think we have here today? It's a big place anyway. And if you've got to remember now, this is before electricity was invented. So these poor guys had to play there without any amplification, and they just, in their air conditioning, right? None of that stuff. But they're just blowing their little hearts out every night. And Baby Dodds remembered later on, he says, every night they just played so hard and so long, and he said he would go to sleep with this music just in his head, you know, going to sleep. He'd dream about it. He'd wake up the next morning, and that'd be the first thing he'd think about was just this music. It was just really something. They played a long time. They would play, some of the tunes would last 45 minutes. So the dancers would think that 3 or 4 minutes is a long time. What do you think about 45-minute tunes? But they'd play Mabel's Dream or something. It would go on forever and ever. It was the most popular band in town, as I mentioned at the time. It was a very, very big deal. And all the musicians came in to see him. Big Spiderbeck came in, Paul Whiteman, Guy Lombardo. And all the musicians would come in sooner or later to see these fellas in action because it was quite a place to see. And they were very nervous about people stealing their ideas. So whenever anybody came in, they would, of course, play something differently and play it really badly, so the musicians wouldn't get, you know, all the good stuff. Yes. But some of them did. People claim that the New Orleans Rhythm Kings took Tin Roof Blues that they wrote from the one we played earlier, the Jazzin' Babies. Dixieland Shuffle was a tune that was done by Bob Crosby, and it came quite obviously from a tune called Riverside Blues, which King Oliver had written. And another one that he wrote, King Oliver wrote, was called the Camp Meeting Blues, and King Oliver picked this, or not King Oliver, Duke Ellington, these royalty people get confused. Duke Ellington picked this up and made a tune called the Creole Love Song. So he was not wrong in thinking people were stealing this stuff. So anyway, we'd like to do the Camp Meeting Blues for you right now, and listen in the middle if you will. I think you'll hear a little bit of what you might recognize as the Creole Love Song. Thank you. Camp Meeting Blues. Thank you very much. The best was yet to come. In 1922, King Oliver now, by this time, you know, is 22 plus 15. He was getting up there. He was in his 40s someplace and starting to fade a little bit. And the competition was fierce in Chicago, and he thought he needed a little more punch. So he sent back to New Orleans for a fellow that he remembered back there that played pretty good cornet. And he thought this might help out the band a little bit if they had 2 cornets instead of 1. So he sent back for a fellow named Louis Armstrong. And of course, Louis jumped at this, and he came to Chicago and joined the band in the very last part of 1922. In 1923, they made some of the most fabulous recordings of all time. And in fact, some of these that we've been doing for you today are the reprints of those. But this 2 cornet business, now, really back in New Orleans around the turn of the century, we had King Buddy Bolden, the very first king of jazz, and Bunk Johnson played along with him for a period of time. So here was 2 cornets. And now King Oliver's doing the same thing. And later on, if you can recall now, if we move up a little bit, 1939 and 1940, here we have Lou Waters bringing in Bob Scobie and having the 2 cornet sound. And that is known now today as the West Coast sound. So if you hear that 2 cornet sound, that's what that is. We're trying to do the 2 cornets with only 1. I have to play both King Oliver and Louis Armstrong. Very difficult. Yes. Anyway, King Oliver, among other things, he invented the mutes. A lot of the mute things that you hear today were started by King Oliver. He was the one that first used the plunger. One of my favorite mutes. It's got a lot of uses. I noticed in Pismo Beach they sell plungers for $2 and trumpet mutes for $10. So it's the same thing. So. But he used the coconut, and this is a coconut shell, and a lot of other things. He used bottles. He used anything he could think of, you know, as mutes. And it was kind of, he is the one that got things started, the wah-wah and all that kind of business. So if you hear that, that's where it kind of got started, was with King Oliver. We'd like to do for you now one of the very first recordings that they did in 1923, as I said, this very famous set of recordings that were done by King Oliver and Louis Armstrong and the Creole Jazz Band. We'd like to do one of the tunes that was done back in those times, 1923, that featured Louis Armstrong on his very first cornet solo. And I'll play that part. Actually, the way we play it, there's no trumpet solo, so I don't know how he must have done it differently. But anyway, this is the tune that he played his first solo on. This is actually a very good feature for our pianist, Paul Price, who's going to be playing the part of Lil Hardin on this one, a nice little thing called the Chimes Blues. Paul Price. Tom's Blues, all right. 1923, lives. All right. There's a famous recording that was done with this group of musicians. By the way, do we have the picture up there? I might have forgot to put the Creole Jazz Band up there. My gosh. I'm losing my mind here. Here's a picture of the way these folks looked. All right, there's Lil Hardin in the middle. Demurray, little piano player. Louis Armstrong, King Oliver playing the cornets, and the whole band. That's the Creole Jazz Band in 1923 that made these wonderful recordings that we're talking about. One of the recording sessions, they were just like we are. You know, we're scared to death of these cameras out here today, and they were the same way when they went to the recording studio. Here, they had never been there before, and here's this electronic stuff, and, you know, they were just used to these dives, you know, at middle of the night. And so they had to move things around. Louis particularly was so strong that he had to move about 20 feet away from the microphone, so it was just blowing these things away. It was wrecking all their equipment, so he had to do that. The drummer couldn't do anything except play in a suitcase, and they just, you know, everything that made noise they had to really tone down. And so they were, of course, kind of nervous about this kind of stuff. Well, one of their big tunes that they did at that time was called Dippermouth Blues. We're going to do that for you right next, but Dippermouth, if you can recall, if you have the record at home, it's got a very interesting part. Near the very tail end, the trumpet player, that would be, of course, Louis Armstrong, was playing away, and they take a break there, and you hear the fella yell out, "Oh, play that thing." Remember that? Well, that's not the way they did it at the Lincoln Gardens. No, at that point, that's where the drum solo came in. You know, this is where Bert would go jip, jip, jip. And in the recording studio, though, this thing came up, and Bill Johnson, remember we talked about him, the bass player, he was still with the band at that time. He's in the picture there. He could see Baby Dodds, his eyes start to roll, and he knew that there was going to be no drum break at that point. So when that time came, that's what he did. He said, "Oh, play that thing." And that was Bill Johnson who did that and saved the day. And of course, we all remember, "Oh, play that thing," and we don't remember anything else about the record very much, but that was the big thing, yes. Nope, you never will, Bert. It's gone forever, too bad. Anyway, we're going to do it for you right now. So you can all join Bill Johnson in making history with "Oh, play that thing." When we get to that time, we'll try to warn you, and we can all do "Play That Thing" together, all right? In voice? Okay, all play that thing. I think you'll get it here. Here we go. Yes, Mike has reminded me that Dippermouth was a very pleasant term used for anybody that had a huge mouth, of course, at that time, but in particular it was used for Louis Armstrong, and so I'm sure he loved that name, but he was known as Dippermouth for quite a while before Satchmo kind of took over, but this is the Dippermouth Blues. I never heard anybody do it better. You were wonderful. Oh, play that thing. That was wonderful. Well, all things have to come to an end. In 1923, some of the musicians started getting disgruntled, and for several reasons, and they decided to leave. Louis Armstrong, Lil Hart at this time thought Louis was much better cornetist, and so he urged Louis to leave. Now, Lil stayed with the band for a little while, but Louis went to New York City to play with Fletcher Henderson, and the Dodds brothers got disenchanted, and they left. Everything kind of went downhill. So it was kind of too bad, but anyway, King Oliver did put together a new band and for Lincoln Gardens, and Christmas Eve was going to be their opening, and so they got all set. They practiced real lot and got all set for this thing. Christmas Eve came, they came down, they played their little hearts out, and somebody with a cigarette or something else did something naughty, and the whole place burned down. So the job lasted about 3 hours. Anyway, everybody then, even the new people in the band got discouraged about that, so they left. So King was forced to join another person's band, which was a fellow named Dave Payton, who was playing at a place called the Plantation Cafe. And he billed King Oliver, though, as the world's greatest jazz cornetist at that time. King Oliver was still known as really hot stuff. And right after that, you might want to bring up the next one. Right after that only lasted for a couple months, and King Oliver was still riding high. He put together a new band. At this time, things were starting to move a little bit more grand. So he added a couple more reeds, and we're starting to move into, you can see, the kind of the swing era, even at that early stage. And this is his band. It was called the Dixie Syncopators. And he moved back into the Plantation Cafe with this band, and they did some recordings, and it was also bad news. King Oliver just seemed to live with bad news, after that point. It was kind of downhill, as you'll see very quickly. But in 1926, he was playing with this band. Across the street was Louis Armstrong playing, and of course that was a little thorn in his side. In 1927, the plantation burned down, and everybody kind of got discouraged and left. But anyway, it was kind of a fun band. We did some, which we luckily still have, and we'd like to do one of them today. This is another one we haven't done before, and to introduce it to you right now. It's a nice one that features the Professor Plum Men's Choir, and just the way King Oliver used to do it, called Got Everything. Very tender words. I think you'll enjoy this. This is a love song. Got Everything.
but it was made for two. What's good without a face? My days are always blue. Lord, take a car, a flat, hang the dog and shoot the cat. Don't want anything but you.
Oh, my, that's Pat DUTROW, Mike Swanson. Got everything but you, babe. Oh, my.
We've had several letters from the Animal Protective Society about that hang the dog and shoot the cat. Is it the other way around?
Well, we could do it the other way, yes. That'd be easy enough. Well, anyway, we're getting kind of the end of the story here of King Oliver. He started touring after the last disastrous fire, and he was never very satisfied. He went to New York City, played a couple weeks at the Savoy Ballroom, which is really the big stuff, and he got offered a job while he was there at the Cotton Club. And they didn't offer him what he thought was enough money, and he said, no deal. So another fellow named Duke Ellington came in and took it instead. So you could see he was not overly bright at that particular time in life. And he actually never did come back. He started doing one-nighters, and they did their last recording in 1931, and his contract got canceled. They went on the road, and he did, you know, kind of one-nighters and around the town and stuff, very low paying kinds of things. They found some of his records just after he died, and he had his records and things showing that they was paying the band 15 cents a night for some jobs and 25 cents a night. So it was, yeah, just like we're, yeah, things haven't changed. But he wasn't realistic, and the Depression, of course, was on, and he was wanting more money. He could see Louis Armstrong doing well, and he wasn't doing that well, and he thought he should be, so he just kind of blew it. But he lost his teeth in 1935 and was down in Savannah and had to get a job in a pool hall just as a kind of custodian down there. And in 1937, Louis Armstrong happened to be in Savannah playing and stopped in, and he knew that he'd found out that King Oliver was there. So he stopped in, talked to him, and he started sending him money because he was his mentor back in the early good days. And so that was kind of the way it all kind of turned out. We'd like to close with a nice number that was done when things were a little bit happier. This was one that was done with King Oliver and Louis Armstrong called the New Orleans Stomps.